All right, so is marriage outdated or is it like a timeless commitment? It feels like such a big question these days, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting because this whole debate isn't just about marriage, like in a vacuum.
Right.
It's about how we view relationships, like in general, you know?
hmm
Love commit, like that whole thing's changing.
Okay, well, let's get into it then. We've got all these articles here talking about cohabitation, open relationships, people even like opting out of relationships entirely.
Yeah, and these aren't just like fringe ideas anymore either. I
Yeah.
mean, Pew Research Center actually found that back in 1960, only like 4% of adults lived with a partner that they weren't married to. But by 2018, that number jumped to over 15%.
Wow.
So that's a huge shift.
Yeah, that's a really big jump.
Mhm.
So does that mean that marriage is becoming irrelevant? I mean, are we heading towards a world where I do is becoming more like I might?
Well, when you start looking at how gender roles are changing too, it's clear that that traditional model of marriage, where the guy is the breadwinner and the woman's the homemaker, it just doesn't work for a lot of people anymore.
Right. Yeah, those old sitcom scenarios where husband goes off to work and the wife's at home baking cookies. That feels so out of touch now.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
And as women are increasingly pursuing careers and, getting to be financially independent on their own, there's less of a need for that traditional economic safety net that marriage used to provide.
That's true. But then there's also this argument that marriage is just a piece of paper,
Right.
right? Some people say it actually takes away from the romance of a relationship.
Yeah, and there's definitely some truth to that, actually. We came across this study from the University of Chicago, and they found that millennials specifically, they're more likely to see marriage as like a financial and legal thing, more than this like sacred bond, you know?
Hmm.
It's about taxes, inheritance, health care benefits,
Hmm.
like not exactly the most romantic stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So is practicality winning out over passion then?
Well, it's not that simple either because marriage rates have actually been going down, especially for younger generations.
No.
Yeah, the U.S. Census Bureau reported that in 2020, the median age for a first marriage was 30 for men and 28 for women, and that's the highest it's ever been.
Huh. Interesting. Okay. So what's causing that? Are millennials just all afraid of commitment?
Not necessarily. I think a lot of them are choosing to focus on personal growth and exploring who they are before settling down.
Right.
They're putting off marriage to focus on education, maybe traveling, building their careers, things that make them feel fulfilled as individuals.
Just like they're changing what it means to be an adult in a way.
Definitely, I don't think they're necessarily rejecting the idea of marriage altogether, but they're definitely redefining it,
Hmm.
in a way that works for them.
Okay. So we've talked about why some people see marriage as being outdated. But what about the flip side? Why does this institution still mean so much to so many people?
Well, even with all these changes, the symbol of marriage is still really strong, It's this public declaration of love and commitment. It's
Right.
like formally saying, hey, we're in this together no matter what happens.
It's a powerful statement, right? It's like standing up in front of everyone you love and making a promise.
Exactly. And it's not just about the emotional side either. Marriage still comes with legal and financial benefits that can be really important for couples,
Yeah, that's true.
especially when you think about things like medical decision making or inheritance rights.
Mm.
We even have this article here that talks about how married couples have a much easier time navigating like really complicated legal situations, especially if there's a crisis or something.
That's a really good point. It's like it adds this layer of security and protection,
Right,
both legally and emotionally. And we can't forget about the cultural and family context either,
right.
right? And a lot of cultures, marriage is still this really important tradition, and it's a way to be accepted in a community.
Absolutely. It's like deeply woven into tradition and how families are structured for a lot of people. And
Oh.
even though roles within relationships are changing, marriage can still provide stability and structure in a world that feels really unpredictable.
Yeah. Especially for people who are looking for a sense of continuity,
Yeah.
like a shared history.
Yeah, for sure.
So it seems like even if the rules of marriage are changing, that basic human need for a lasting partnership is still there.
Yeah, I think so. And I think for a lot of people, the commitment of marriage means a deeper level of permanence and dedication compared to less formal relationships.
Mm.
It's about planning a future together, maybe having kids growing old with someone.
Yeah, but of course, we can't talk about marriage without talking about divorce, right? I mean, with divorce rates as high as they are, it's one of the biggest criticisms of the whole institution.
That's true, but I think it's important to look at what those numbers really mean. Does a high divorce rate mean that marriage itself is failing? Or could it mean that people are more willing to leave unhealthy relationships now instead of just staying because they feel like they have to?
That's an interesting way to look at it. So maybe higher divorce rates actually mean that people are putting more importance on personal happiness now.
It's definitely possible. I mean, we have to remember that societal expectations around marriage have changed so much in the last few decades.
Right.
In the past, people might have stayed in unhappy marriages because of social pressure or because they were financially dependent on their partner. But now there's more emphasis on individual well-being and being free to pursue relationships that make you happy, even if that means ending a marriage that's not working anymore.
So maybe marriage itself isn't broken, but people are less willing to settle for a relationship that doesn't make them happy.
Exactly. And I think that brings up a really important point. Having realistic expectations about marriage is
Right.
key.
Yeah.
You know, it's not a fairy tale.
Right.
It's an ongoing partnership that takes effort and being able to adapt and constant communication.
So it's less about happily ever after and more about being willing to work on it constantly.
Exactly. Seeing marriage as a journey and not just a destination is really important, I think.
Yeah.
It's about knowing that both people in the relationship will change over time and that the relationship has to change too.
All right. So to get a better idea of how all this works in real life, we reached out to some people who've made different choices about marriage.
Yeah.
We wanted to hear their stories and their perspectives firsthand.
And the range of perspectives is amazing. We talked to Sarah, and she told us that for her, marriage was a way to make her commitment to her partner even stronger and to face whatever life throws at them as a team. She wasn't just focused on the legal and financial side of it, but on making a public statement about their love and dedication to each other.
So she sees it as a way to strengthen their bond and give them a shared purpose.
Yes, exactly. And then there's Mark, who's been in a committed relationship for over a decade, but doesn't feel like he needs the formality of marriage.
Okay.
For him, the commitment's already there, you know? Whether or not they have a legal document to prove it, they've built a life together, they share their finances, they support each other through good times and bad, so they don't see the need for a piece of paper to validate their relationship.
So for him, it's more about how the relationship actually is rather than the symbolism or the legal side of things.
Exactly. It's about finding what works for them as a couple, you know, regardless of what society expects.
So both of those stories really highlight that intention and dedication are so important no matter what your relationship status is.
Right. Whether you choose to get married or go a different route, the important thing is to be committed to growing and communicating and supporting each other in the relationship.
Yeah. So it seems like there's no single right answer here.
Right.
Whether you're pro-marriage, anti-marriage, or somewhere in between, the most important thing is the quality of the relationship itself.
I think that's a great way to put it, and that leads to a bigger question. How are all these changing social norms and individual needs shaping the future of marriage?
Yeah.
Is it changing? Is it disappearing? Or is it something totally different? What will commitment and partnership look like in the years to come?
Yeah, those are big questions. And as we continue exploring this topic in the next part of our deep dive, we're going to look at how our own experiences, like our families or the media we consume, even affect how we see marriage.
Yeah.
Because this isn't just some theoretical debate, you know. It's something that impacts all of us in some way.
And it's funny how often the families we grew up in shape our views on marriage.
Yeah, totally.
Like if you saw a happy marriage growing up, you're probably more likely to see marriage in a positive light. But if you experienced a lot of conflict or divorce, you might be a little more hesitant about it.
Makes sense. It's like those early experiences kind of set the stage for how we view relationships.
Yeah. And then there are those societal pressures too,
Yeah.
especially in cultures where getting married is seen as like a sign of being adult or being successful.
Yeah.
Like in some cultures, there's this expectation that you'll get married, have kids, buy a house. Like there's this whole set path you're supposed to follow. And when that clashes with what you actually want, it can create a lot of conflict.
Yeah, it's like trying to figure out what society tells you versus what feels right for you.
Exactly.
And then we got pop culture too, right? All those movies and TV shows, they give us this picture of what love and marriage are supposed to be like.
Oh, yeah. And those pictures are often so romanticized and unrealistic, you know?
Totally.
They set these expectations that are almost impossible to actually live up to.
Yeah, which is why I think it's so important to talk about these things openly.
Absolutely.
You know, with yourself, your partner,
Yeah.
your friends and family.
It's all about communication, right?
Yeah.
Like whether you're thinking about getting married or doing something different or just trying to figure out what you want in the first place, talking about your hopes and fears and expectations can really help you make better decisions.
Totally.
Yeah.
It's about figuring out what's important to you when it comes to commitment and partnership.
Exactly. And knowing that there isn't one right way to do things.
Right.
It's about finding what works for you and your partner.
And being open to the idea that those needs and desires might change over time too.
Absolutely, people change, relationships change, so it makes sense that our views on marriage might change too.
Yeah, it's not about sticking to some rigid definition of marriage.
Right.
It's about creating relationships that help both people grow and feel fulfilled.
I agree.
One thing we haven't really talked about is love.
Oh, yeah.
Because some people see marriage as the ultimate way to show love.
Hmm.
It's like the biggest gesture, you know, making this lifelong commitment.
It's like saying, I love you so much that I want to spend the rest of my life with you legally and everything.
Yeah, but then other people say that love doesn't need a contract.
Right.
It's about the emotional connection,
Yeah.
you know, sharing your values and just supporting each other every day.
And those things can exist whether or not you have a marriage license.
Right. So it really comes down to what marriage means to you in terms of love and commitment.
Exactly. It's like there are different ways to show love, you know? Some people like those grand gestures and public declarations, while others prefer something more quiet and personal.
Yeah,
And those different approaches can happen both inside and outside of marriage.
that's so true. And it's interesting to think about how all this plays out in different cultures.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Like in some parts of the world, arranged marriages are still really common.
Right.
And while that might seem strange or old-fashioned to some people, it's important to remember the cultural and societal context that those traditions come from.
Yeah, it's about respecting different ways of life
Mhm.
and recognizing that there's no one right way to approach marriage or relationships.
Exactly. And it reminds us that this conversation about marriage isn't just happening in one place.
Mm-hmm.
It's happening all over the world, shaped by different cultures, religious beliefs, and social values.
It's like this huge tapestry made up of all these individual stories and experiences.
Yeah. And each one adds something new
Hmm.
and makes the whole picture even richer and more complicated.
Which is what makes this conversation so interesting. It makes us think critically about our own beliefs, you know,
Hmm.
and be open to other perspectives and talk to each other even when we disagree.
I know. I'm really curious to hear what our listeners think about all of this.
Me too.
What are their experiences with marriage, their hopes,
Yeah.
their concerns?
Yeah, they probably have some really interesting perspectives to share.
So if you're listening, we'd love to hear your thoughts on whether marriage is outdated or not, and what commitment and partnership mean to you today.
Definitely leave a comment or find us on social media. Let's keep talking about this because ultimately it's about understanding how we connect with each other and celebrating all the ways we love and commit to one another.
And as we head into the last part of our deep dive,
Yeah.
so we want to leave you with something to think about because like we've seen, there's no easy answer to this whole marriage thing.
Yeah.
Is it outdated or is it going to stick around? It really depends on your own values and what you believe.
Right. And even though there's no easy answer, it's clear that the way we think about marriage is definitely changing. I mean, it's being reshaped by so many things, all these changes in society, gender roles, this focus on like individual happiness.
So that brings up a really important question for everyone, single, coupled up, married, whatever.
Yeah.
How do we deal with all these changes and make relationships that actually last in a world where like even commitment itself seems to be changing all the time?
It's a question we all need to think about because at the end of the day, it's about connecting with other people, finding love, building a life with someone, however that looks for you.
Yeah, and everyone's journey is going to be different. There's no one right way to do it. So as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with a few things to consider.
Okay.
Sounds good.
So think about what commitment really means to you. What are the things you absolutely need in a relationship? What are your hopes for the future, whether that includes marriage or not?
And how can you make a relationship that supports both of you as individuals, but also helps you achieve your goals together? How do you keep those lines of communication open and deal with all the changes that life throws at you?
These are tough questions, but they're worth thinking about because figuring out love and relationships in this crazy world means looking inward, being honest with yourself, and being open to the challenges and the beauty of connecting with other people.
And we want you to feel hopeful because even with all the challenges and questions, there's something really amazing about this need we all have to connect with each other to find love and to build a life with someone no matter how we do it.
So whether you go the traditional marriage route or find your own path, we hope you do it with purpose, with love, and with an open mind ready to grow and learn with your partner.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the ever-changing world of marriage. Keep exploring, keep connecting, and keep these conversations going.